from Italy. She's the new vice director, right, of the giornale di Brescia.
Yes.
And so we can start with the stream. It's okay. So Anna.
Yes, let me introduce, and thank you very much, Giorgio, for inviting us, and thank you for hoping that we'd come to Sicily. I think eventually we will, but so far we have to keep doing this remotely.
Grazie per l'invito.
I'm hearing another voice. Is there a translation?
Translation.
Oh, I see. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. So you're translating me in Italian. That's so weird. Okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure that the audience knows that there will be a moment where they can ask questions, and so I encourage them to take notes and eventually send questions in, and I would like
or challenges or arguments or anything they like.
Exactly, criticisms or any curiosity they might want us to talk about, and I will try to. I know that you're going to be fielding in the questions, Giorgio, and sending them to me, and I will gladly read them aloud. And if you send them to me in Italian, I have no problem trying to translate them into English for MADHAV and Jeff. So yes, I am the managing editor for the digital development of Giornale di Brescia, which is a local newspaper, which is actually thriving here in Brescia, but we would like to help it thrive also online. And so we're trying to help them do the transition. And MADHAV and Jeff are wonderful digital experts for digital news. And so for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to talk to them and moderate what they're saying, but really to introduce them. MADHAV is, yes, he is the director of news ecosystem development at Google. He's also a member of the Reuters Institute School of Journalism Advisory Board, and he's study of journalism, sorry, not School of Journalism, study of journalism. And they just released a new report, as everybody knows, which is called the DNR 22 report, the digital news report, which has also a big section in Italy. And I wonder if everybody knows about it, but some of the trends that come out of this are interesting, and I would like to talk about them after I introduce also Jeff. Jeff Jarvis is the director of the Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism. He's really a professor of journalism innovation, and as we all know him, he's really a huge expert of digital journalism. He's been a blogger since forever, and you can still find him on buzzmachine.com. And he's the author of a great pamphlet called Geeks Bearing Gifts, Imagining New Futures for News, which was published by CUNY, by the City University of New York Journalism Press in 2014. And since then, he keeps writing and fighting on social media. He's one of the most social media journalists that I know of, really very, very present on Twitter. So follow him on Twitter if you haven't done that already. He's one of the, and I don't want to make you blush, Jeff, but you're one of the 100 most influential media leaders by the World Economic Forum at Davos, so I may as well say that as well.
They don't invite me anymore, so I'm not important.
Anyways, so the subject of this panel wants to be constructive, and so we decided, instead of starting to complain again about how journalism and news organizations are not up to the task, the challenge of doing constructive and good journalism in this new digital ecosystem, we were trying to think of a way of actually singling out the opportunities that are behind the crisis of legacy media. And so I would start with MADHAV, and because I know you have 3 clear points that you want to make about this. So I was thinking maybe you can start out, and then I will pass the word to Jeff. Please, MADHAV.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Giorgio. And I'd just like to echo what Anna said. I'm so sorry we are not with you in Sicily. We've tried twice. We haven't made it twice, so perhaps third time lucky. But I will say we're having a little bit of Sicilian weather here in London right now, which is why I'm I'm wearing a t-shirt. So I'm with you in spirit, shall we say? So thank you very much. As Anna said, I work at Google on our Google News initiative, which is our overarching program to help enable a sustainable, diverse, and innovative ecosystem of quality journalism. And I think that the title is really appropriate, right? You know, is the crisis an opportunity? And actually, I think it is an opportunity. And I think there's data and examples in Italy of why this is an opportunity. And so my kind of provocation of what the opportunity is based around three things. The first is actually around trust and connections. And if you read the digital news report, as I'm waving here, because I'm a big fan of it, a lot of the coverage of the digital news report is talking about how trust has decreased this year. But I think if you look underneath the surface of the numbers, what you see is that during the COVID years, there was an increase, and actually there has been a drop-off since last year. But where you are, even in Italy, if I've read the data right, is you are higher than pre-COVID times, which for me shows that trust can be earned back. So that it is not all doom and gloom, that you need to continue to work and continue to build on trust. And that's, I think, done through connections. And, you know, as Anna and Giorgio know better than anybody, local news organizations are probably the ones that are most closely connected with their audiences. And, you know, I really do hope that Anna is not shy and will tell you about what Brescia has been doing, because some of the things she shared with us were deeply impressive about the money that they've been raising for their own communities, and use that, which I think is showing that trust and connection can really create value. I think the second thing that I think is an opportunity is really around formats. And I think what you see formats in different ways. These may be the growth of podcasts, and, you know, I've been hearing very good things about the podcast news ecosystem in Italy, and that's growing. But also other things that are really important in these really quite complicated times. And things like explainer videos that are actually quite factual, but done in the right way, can really resonate with audiences. And I was recently at an event with a brilliant BBC journalist called Roz Atkins. And I should have said in the beginning, I'm ex-BBC and ex-AP, so those are I'm just a news person, not a techie. So I'm slightly prejudiced to enjoy and rate the coverage of both those outlets. But Roz Atkins has been doing a lot of really groundbreaking work in the English language medium about explainer videos, which go viral. So, you know, he does 8-minute videos that go viral. When you think of things that go viral, 8-minute videos about the scandal of Partygate and the ridiculousness of the Boris Johnson government, doesn't really seem like a video that you think would go viral, but done well. And this is the point about formats and the point about digital. Done well and done creatively, I think, can be very, very important. And the final thing I would say on formats is, I think when we have such difficult news, whether it's war in Ukraine, whether it's COVID, whether it's an upcoming recession, which is also negative, the news can be negative. And that's one of the things that comes out in the digital news report. There is a growing set of audience that are news avoiders. I actually think the constructive journalism approach to try to engage those people on what the solutions are, and not to pretend that it is not difficult, but to show that actually, if you explain the situation and you show that there are solutions in certain places, that actually people can engage more, and hopefully they will avoid less. And the final piece I would say is really, in terms of the opportunity, is around business models. I think if COVID taught us anything, it was that from a business model perspective, a lot of news organizations, because unsurprisingly, advertising revenues went down. If you were in a print newspaper, circulation went down or became close to zero. That they tried lots of different things. And, you know, I think that's important. And actually, they got results from that. So simply asking people, would you donate? Which people have been very shy about. Actually, a lot of the ones that experimented with donation got much more than they thought. So really, I think there is an opportunity, I would say, based around trust, formats, and business models. So I will stop and let the big brain of Jeff and Anna keep going.
Yeah, and thank you so much. You were very clear, and your 3 points are very well made. And I know Jeff has 3 points too, so go right ahead.
Well, now that MADHAV has 3, I have to have at least 4. So listening to MADHAV coming off of his point about forms, I will go obnoxiously farther, which is what I do, and say that I think we have the opportunity to break out of the forms that we are used to. That journalism is more than stories. It is more than content. Journalism is a service. And there's so many more ways now to fulfill that service to the public using the net. So that's my first point, is I think that we can think of ourselves obviously around data, around events, around education, all kinds of ways that we can reimagine what journalism is beyond just writing stories. Second is that I'm more interested these days in studying the internet than in studying journalism. I think this is a way to expand our the canvas that we paint on to be much bigger than just printed media or just text on a screen. And so I think that we've got to rethink our role in that larger world. We in media tend to look at the world godlike in our image, and we think everything is media. So we see the internet come along and we think, well, that's a third kind of media. There's print and there's broadcast, and now there's the internet. I think that's completely wrong. I think instead, the internet is the connected world is a much larger circle. And inside that are media, also communications, also social, also retail. Education has been dragged in because of the pandemic. Crime is in there. Politics and government are in there. And so if we think of ourselves as workers on the internet, I think we have a much broader opportunity to find more ways to serve the public and democracy. That's my second point. And so what that really means is that I want you all to reinvent journalism. I am too old to do it. The reason I teach is so I can watch my students do it. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there. And so we've started new programs at my school. I want to tell you about 2 of them. Maybe you'll come to New York, the center of the universe. One is, and I hope this will be relevant to Anna as well, we started a new program in engagement journalism. We called it social journalism before. It's not just social media. It's about understanding communities first, listening to communities, respecting their needs, reflecting back their needs, saying, did I get you right here? Did I understand what you need? And letting the community's needs drive the agenda of journalism rather than thinking that we egotistically should drive the agenda of the public conversation. And so in engagement journalism, we want to change the relationship of journalists to public. And what Anna's doing at Brescia, is a huge opportunity there, especially locally, to rethink what the relationship of journalism and community are. And the other program we started or kind of rebuilt was our entrepreneurial program. It used to be about starting a company, but now it's about independent, individual journalists who are serving communities or markets and making a living at it using the tools that exist today, making money off YouTube, Patreon, Substack, Medium, and so on and so on. And so we now have an online-only international program lasting 100 days, taught by my colleague Jeremy Kaplan, which any of you could tomorrow create your own journalistic enterprise. Not going to be a big company. You're not going to get bought by Google probably, but you can make a living doing your journalism. And the last point I want to make is this. There was just a story in the Washington Post this week about Lambda, a chat bot that a Google engineer said was sentient, had human feelings. It was pure bullshit. But the story, because the story fit into a bunch of media narratives about dangerous, scary doings in Silicon Valley. And so they loved that. But what I saw as I looked at that story is that in a matter of hours, the New York Times called the same person, but wrote the same story. And then the Daily Mail and other publications did it. And then within a day, Google News was filled with screenfuls of headlines, which were basically the same story rewritten. And then the next day it was appearing in other languages, in Italian, in French, in German, all around the world, basically the same story. We are a terribly inefficient industry. The economics of our industry as it is drive us to try to get attention from the audience by rewriting each other. So we get our own story with our own page view, with our own search engine optimization, with our own links and clicks, with our own pennies of advertising. That has to stop. We have to turn around journalism and not measure its success based on things like time and clicks and attention and page views, but instead on the value that we bring to communities, and let the communities judge our value. And that, again, is why I'm so excited that Anna, who's one of the most brilliant people in journalism, is at a newspaper where she can affect this change and experiment with new ways to do just that. I'll end there.
Wow, thank you. You're putting a lot of pressure on me now. So before I ask the public to join the conversation, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing and how I'm trying to apply your advice at Giornale di Brescia. Giornale di Brescia is a small local news organization which also has a local television, Teletutto, and a local radio station, so a website and a paper. And during COVID, in the 2 years of COVID, the community around Giornale di Brescia, thanks to the call that Giornale di Brescia made and was able to connect also all the fundraisers and all the foundations that wanted to give money and all the small organizations that wanted to give money, through Giornale di Brescia, 18 million euros were raised. And they were raised in the first few months of 2020. So in the first few months of the pandemic, and they're still raising them. I mean, the fundraiser has never stopped, but an incredible outpouring of money arrived, and Giornale di Brescia handled it and was able to do it in a transparent way, giving back information about it, keeping up updates, and eventually publishing a huge book, paper book, which is also online, but the paper book is amazing, that was given to all everybody who pitched in, and it was like the gift that Giornale di Brescia gave back to the community that decided to participate in this huge fundraising to help in the emergency of COVID, to help the local hospitals to buy masks, to buy oxygen, and all that. And this shows that a local newspaper can actually be so strongly attached to its community that it can actually do the fundraising. The problem is that a local newspaper is too shy to ask local readers to pay for the paper. So what we need to do now is convince the local community that if they love their local newspaper, if they love the local news organization online too, as well, and they want it to thrive and to keep being there, they have to start supporting it economically. So as you know, as we all know, we are not discovering this through this newspaper. All newspapers are going through this. Old subscribers to paper versions of the newspapers are dying, and when they die, especially during COVID, in Brescia, 4,000 people died. They were all elderly, and the problem mostly were subscribers. And so we had huge amounts of the necrology. I forget how you say that in English. The announcents of the deaths of people are everybody pays for that.
Obituaries,
the obituaries. Sorry, the word couldn't come to me. So the obituaries are all paid. So we had huge, incredible amounts of pages of obituaries on the paper version, and the more the obituaries came, the less subscribers were there. So because the younger people are not used to, they don't have the habit of subscribing to a newspaper. And so in spite of the fact that we were raising a huge amount of money for the COVID emergency, the newspaper was losing subscriptions, which is kind of an absurd situation. And they didn't take advantage because it seemed unethical to ask during an emergency, you need to subscribe to the paper while you're also giving money for subscription. So this has been postponed. Now that the crisis is almost over, because COVID unfortunately still is here, and a lot of elderly people are still getting COVID, and there's a lot of elderly people in this region. So in spite of that, I mean, we haven't started a subscription policy, a subscription, a smart way to ask people to subscribe, not just for the paper, but also for the online version. So we will get there, I think. But I think what we need to do is exactly what you said, Jeff. I think we need to do some kind of a cultural transformation where we convince our readers that we will service them better, but we need them to support us, and we have to ask them to support. Instead of putting just a straight paywall, we need to ask them to support us the way other big examples are. I mean, there's international examples. The Guardian is doing that. Il Post in Italy is doing it, and it was mentioned by the Reuters news report. Il Post is doing a really good subscription campaign, really serving a community of readers, which is not geolocalized like Giornale di Brescia. It's a national community. It's all digital, all very smart, and they're doing podcasts and newsletters. But we can do that here on a local level also. And let me tell you that local news actually work very well online. Right now, we are really focusing a lot on Instagram to reach the young generation of readers. I mean, the potential of young people who maybe have the grandfather or their father who reads the newspaper, or their mother, and they're not the readers, but they find us on Instagram, and we embrace their causes, we embrace the news that they're interested in, and we try to engage them. As you said, engagement generally, we try to engage them on things that they're interested in. And when we do that, when we are able to cross their interest, the engagement is very high, and it's working really well. So Instagram is growing like crazy, which is making me hopeful that eventually I will be able also to open a TikTok channel to reach even younger audiences, and maybe with also videos, which we're doing reels and videos. Right now we have the Mille Miglia race in Brescia, which is a very big tradition in Brescia, and it's doing really well. We have there's many news, many subjects that are a real concern for Brescia people. Like right now, there's this incredible emergency because we don't have water because of the heat wave. The heat wave is drying up all the water in the whole region, and which means agriculture is in crisis, and which means people are feeling like they need to start rationing the water at home, even, and in the way they are actually watering the land. And so water issues are a big problem, and we're trying to face that, and these issues are going really well. All the work problem, the theme of work and jobs for young people is a huge, we did a huge inquiry on this, and we're doing it on paper and online, and on social media, and it's actually going the reverse. We're crowdsourcing the stories from social media, especially on LinkedIn, because work goes really well on LinkedIn. So we're asking people on LinkedIn, how much are they getting paid for seasonal jobs? And the pays are really low, and they're very shitty in Italy. Italy is the European country that has the lowest wages in Europe. Okay, and they haven't been raised in the past 7 years, and so we're asking employers to pay better, and we're interviewing them and asking them how come they're paying them so in such a shitty way, and employers are feeling like they have to justify themselves, and they say, well, it's the fiscal system. It's the problem is that we're burdened with too many taxes in Italy, and so a salary costs us 3 times as much as what we're actually giving out. So actually, it's true that the worker gets the least money in Europe, but we pay the most in Europe on taxes. And so this discussion is going on, and we're trying to find the reason we are doing this inquiry in steps. So it's an open inquiry. Once a week, we write 2 pages on the paper, and we keep writing on the web and on social media. Is that we want to keep this an open question, where more and more people call us up and ask us to be interviewed to tell their story. And so this is becoming a huge choral story, reached, where everybody actually wants to chip in also with solutions. So hopefully, eventually, we're going to organize a huge event here. We were thinking of doing it in September, after the whole summer writing about this and talking about this with everybody, with all the parts involved, all the stakeholders, from the unions to the agencies that find work, to the politicians, to the employers, to the students and who are looking for a job, to try to then put them around a table and try to make a list of possible solutions. And maybe we can actually even send these ideas to the government to lower taxes, but also to the employers and to the unions, to sit around a table to make it more to make flexibility less a question of just making people poorer, because flexibility in Italy, flexible job, so far means being more insecure, having no chance of having a steady job and a steady fixed income that you can rely on to make a family, to buy to open a mortgage, to buy a house. There's no future. So young people are leaving. They're leaving Brescia, but they're leaving also Italy, really. And they're going abroad. And this is for us. Then, we can't complain if we only have elderly people living here and the young people leaving Italy. So this is, and I'm sure that this problem is actually a universal national problem, if not even international, but we're trying to focus on the local, but as you know, local is global nowadays. So this is how it's working. So I think this is a real promising branch of journalism that we're trying to foster, because they're not used to do it. I think most local newspapers tend to only write about what we call cronaca nera, just the regular news that comes out through accidents and with the police reports and the hospital reports. And so there's a lot of breaking news that are news that you can find anywhere and that don't really distinguish us. So we need to distinguish ourselves with some major subjects that give us weight and a role for the society that is around Brescia. Anyways, I didn't want to make it too long. I did see that the point that you made, MADHAV, about trust is huge, and the news organizations in Italy who are actually working on trust are doing better. Sole 24 Ore, which is a national newspaper, and it's actually a financial national newspaper that also went through some pretty bad stories in the past, has actually climbed positions on the digital news report and has climbed the position and became second most trusted news source in Italy. And guess what? They're the only Italian newspaper who applied the Trust Project, which I'm sure you both know that I'm a fan of. And I'm planning to bring the Trust Project to Giornale di Brescia to make our newspaper the first Italian local newspaper applying the Trust Project. Because I think, and I'm just going to explain to the audience who might not know what the Trust Project is, but if you look it up, there's a website called thetrustproject.org. It's an organization it's a network that has actually really helped international newspapers who wanted to be more trusted, because they've noticed that there's a real trust problem. A lack of trust has been growing and growing in these years from the public. So to conquer the public and be more trustworthy, they have published a series of 8 indicators, and the indicators are designed to make the news organization more trustworthy online, because there's tags behind the articles that help index this article in a better way, so that the public can understand better if it's a piece of news or if it's an opinion. They can understand better if there's a conflict of interest. There's more transparency all the way through. And the bylines are clickable. You know who the author is. You can tell if the story has been written originally or if it's a news service that wrote it, and it's a copy and paste. As you said, we're an inefficient industry, and I totally agree, Jeff. The problem of us rewriting the same copies, the same stories in all of the newspapers is a huge problem that we're not able to get rid of. Even in the local newspaper, I'm having a hard time convincing that we should not just publish wire services, because wire services are everywhere. We're publishing wire services because we have the feeling that if we don't, for certain news that we're not able to cover, then we're not being complete and we're not covering everything. And so there's I have to try to understand, and maybe Jeff, you can tell me this. How can I convince the newspaper that publishing something that is everywhere already is a waste of paper if it's published on paper, and paper costs a lot of money, so it's a cost, it's an extra cost, and it doesn't really satisfy the principle of quality and trustworthiness, because people who read an article that has no byline, and that because we don't even publish the fact that that's a news agency, it's like an anonymous piece. There's stories online that go online from the paper version without a byline. So I'm trying to convince them, and I think I'm with many of the colleagues, I'm able to convince them that stories without bylines that are not original, that have not been worked by a journalist, contribute to something that I would call, I'm not saying spam, but definitely it's not ecological. It's not, there's an ecosystem that we have to be careful about. And so we should not continue to put in junk in this huge amount of media and this huge amount of, this huge overload of information. So we should start, less is more in journalism. And I think, we should do less better instead of tons and tons of information, hoping, because I'm being told, oh, you should fill the website with lots of news, because the more news you put in there, the more clicks there are. But then the more clicks are not going to make us better. So the ethics, luckily, I'm very happy that the ethics of this publisher that I'm working for, which is a Catholic publisher, the publisher is a Catholic banking foundation, and they have this ethics about the fact they understand when I tell them we should do better quality, less quantity, we shouldn't care about the fact that we don't have huge numbers, but what we should care about is that we have a strong community, and we should build on the community. And we're not building on the community by making more quantity, more news, more clicks, more amount of articles, but the articles should be better curated, and that's the real trick there. So if you guys have any suggestions for me, and in the meantime, I think we have, a lot of time for questions, and I'm actually seeing Giorgio just sent me some, and so if eventually I already have 4 questions for you guys. So in case you want me to read them to you right after you first you, Jeff, and then Madhav, and then I will read you the questions.
Well, I'll just try to answer the last question you had, is how to convince your colleagues.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I would say that Google can present a solution to you. So I know Madhav gets frustrated, as all the Googlers do, and people constantly say, how do I get higher in search engine optimization? How do I do more of this? And Madhav always tells them, don't pay attention to that. Give people value. And I think that if you take the stories that they've rewritten and you go to Google and search for it, and you find 300 versions of the same story, it shows how futile and stupid that is. Whereas if you're the only paper that's covering the local community, and you go in and search and find out you're unique and have value there, then that might help convince them.
I have a build on that, which may sound radical, but I think it's being used by a number of publishers, local publishers all over the world, which is actually ask your readers and your community what they want. And you're seeing this all over the world and I think curiously, it kind of built up during COVID, where they were like, well, what do we do? So a lot of things moved online, but actually now, as COVID is subsiding in some places, that they're doing, community events where they go and ask people what they want and go and actually test that. And I think that, going back to your point, Anna, and I think we should definitely get to the questions, but going back to your point about the kind of culture, and that, sometimes, journalism can be too shy to ask for donations and things like that. I think sometimes it can also be too arrogant to ask people what they want, right? Because they think that we know what we want. So I think I would say, and, why don't you actually create a series of roadshows or something in your area where you just go out and ask people what they want, or even ask how they're consuming your content, because sometimes the way they're consuming your content may not be the way that you think it is, right? And that, I think really understanding the audience, and that goes back to the point that I think, at least for Brescia and for a lot of the local news organizations you have that connection and that trust already. So you really need to build on it and make it better, rather than take it for granted. And I think going out and talking to people is a really good way to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Madam, so there's a question for you right away. You mentioned that despite what many believe, trust in media has increased in many countries during the COVID crisis. In your opinion, what did the media ecosystem do right and what did it do wrong?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. And I think what it did right was that I think during COVID, it was such a different event from everything. I mean, like it was almost like the world was sharing an experience. And it gave kind of a singular focus. And going back to Jeff's point, I think there was a switch to service journalism, to telling you what's going on with COVID rates, what's going with hospitals, where can you get vaccines, what can you do about that, and really kind of trying to, when you have such a big event like that, there's a natural feeling, I think, as a human, that you can feel incredibly powerless, right? But I think the most connective, engaging, constructive journalism is the things that explain it and then give you some hope and some concrete actions, right? And I think that that's what they did right. I think what perhaps we did wrong is that, and again, this is a discussion with a BBC colleague that I had, is that sometimes it became too singular. And I think it became too singular, so it then became repetitive over time. So all of a sudden, everybody had a beautiful chart about COVID rates here and there, but you stopped looking at it, right? And I think what happens is often with news, and I come from a broadcast TV news background, and this is so true of broadcast TV news, is that it's a machine, that you actually just are in the cycle of production, that you just produce the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that can be a bit too singular, and I'm agreeing too much with Jeff, which is scary for me. I have a few things I disagree with. If we still have time, I have a few things I disagree with him on, which we can do to be tasty, but we should get keep going with the questions. But I think that the thing that was done wrong was, I think there was too much repetition, and I think, we need to move it on and think about it in different ways, and because people in different stages now with it, what is the service of it now that is important?
Okay. Jeff, for you, if the person who's sending me this message understood your point correctly, you see an opportunity for rejuvenating journalism by serving the needs of communities. Does this also mean that journalists should take sides on social and political issues if their community demands such a level of involvement? So activism, I imagine he's talking about.
We also have the debate in American journalism about objectivity, or in the UK language, impartiality. I recommend to you an op-ed written in the New York Times about 2 years ago by Wesley Lowery, who was a Washington Post journalist who covered police shootings and got a Pulitzer for it. He's African-American. He got in trouble with his editors for what he did on Twitter, and he quit. And he wrote in this op-ed that objectivity is fundamentally a white racist construct, because it's a construct of power. It's whoever's in charge saying this is objective and that's biased. And the problem is that, as he is an African-American, as a Black journalist, was told too often, oh, you're biased because you're Black. Or there's a book called The View from Somewhere by Louis Raven Wallace, who's a transsexual journalist who was fired from public radio in the US because he wouldn't sign on to their view of objectivity. And they told him all the time, you can't cover this story because you're transsexual, because you have a bias. And what they were doing was they were getting rid of his lived experience. He had an expertise in what it was like to live in America as a trans person, but they didn't want to listen to that, and they got rid of that. Now, does that make him an advocate, or does that make him an expert? What we have right now in America, and I apologize to the world for what Trump did to everyone and what we're going through even still now. The Washington Post says democracy dies in darkness, and they stand for democracy. Well, what does it mean to stand for democracy? What does it mean to stand for fairness? What does it mean to stand for justice? I think those are all matters of both journalism and, yes, advocacy. We've always been advocates. I asked this question of Alan Rusbridger, the former editor of The Guardian, years ago, when The Guardian, is said to be the world's leading liberal voice. And I said, okay, what do you answer when people challenge you about that? And he said, intellectual honesty. that we in journalism do have standards of intellectual honesty, of reporting the things that do disagree with our worldview, that do inform people, no matter what your perspective or your experience. But at the end of the day, I think for us to act as if we are superhuman and we don't have opinions and we don't have a worldview is itself a form of a lie. So no, I don't think you go in the community and say, I'm going to side with that politician, or I'm going to even side with that issue. But as MADHAV said earlier, I think he mentioned solutions journalism. That's a view that says that we should report to people the kinds of solutions people are attempting. We should report that there are efforts to fix problems. We should report ways that people can make a difference. And I don't think that's advocacy at all. I think that's being a part of the community.
Can I just jump in?
Yes, you should.
Not just this is, again, not a disagreement, but just another perspective on that, which is, I think there's a lot of dimensions to this. And for me, I see it a bit of as a spectrum. And maybe this is from my AP and BBC backgrounds, but I think that actually I put activism on one end of the spectrum, and you can be an expert and you can move into, I think you cross a line into activism, but I think you can, have a perspective and be an expert without being an activist, right? And I think that's some of the tension that is there. But I also think we need to understand a lot of the history. I would say, particularly, maybe this is more of a Anglo-Saxon perspective, but newspapers, particularly in the UK, for example, where I'm based, have always had a partisan view. You know which ones are right, you know which ones are left, and this is relatively common in most places, I would say. But the other dimension to that is they also have opinion pages, right? And I think all of this has kind of got conflated, right? And I think that, going back to how people consume your content, I think that, like, in that old model where people thought, oh, look, they know that they're reading the news page and that's going to be impartial and objective. Oh, but it's okay. They're going to flip over and then they read the opinions pieces and they know completely that that's a different worldview and that it's okay. They're in a different space. I'm not sure it was that simple. And then when you get to digital, where everything gets atomized, right? I have seen over the years many people send me Guardian opinion articles, which have the orange, which say opinion on it, and they say, "Hey, have you seen this Guardian article?" In the same way that they would send a news article. So again, I think we almost as a news industry, we haven't helped ourselves, and that atomization makes it much more complicated. But I do think, going back to Jeff's point about Wesley Lowery, I think the one of the lines that I heard is that, it's about that power element to it, right? If you're completely neutral, then actually you're on the side of the current power structure, right? And so actually nothing is truly neutral, right? Because if you say nothing or you don't have a perspective, then that's the power structure that you are tacitly supporting, right? Which becomes very complicated when you get to all those issues.
Now, let me jump in on this also. David Weinberger, many years, I think it was 8 years ago, 2014, said transparency is the new objectivity. And we've had many panels at the Journalism Festival in Perugia talking about transparency is the new objectivity. The problem is that in Italian media, on social media, and the journalists who are at this panel here looking at us, I'm sure many of them are Italian and know what I'm talking about. When they use social media with the excuse, of objectivity, because they say we are journalists, so we are objective, they actually take sides on social media like they're in they're in an arena and fighting, they really fight they really fight on social media, and they take sides without really being transparent about it. Transparency, as you said, that Rasbiger said, intellectual honesty is what should distinguish journalists, is that then it's the public who decides whether someone is intellectually honest or not, depending on how you're behaving. If you're behaving by taking sides and saying I'm allowed to take, my side is right because I'm a journalist, I'm objective. I mean, that's what many Italian journalists are doing in social media, and they're shutting up. They're behaving like trolls almost. Okay, they're trolling on Twitter, they're trolling on Facebook, and it's become so complicated to accept, and so difficult to accept, that many, even when I was a social media editor and I was a public editor, I had to write social media policy, public editing policy for the journalists being on social media, like rules for them to behave on social media. They wouldn't discredit their newspaper, the news organization, not because they were taking sides, and they were, of course, they were exercising their freedom of expression, but they were actually fighting. They were going overboard. They were insulting other people in a way that was becoming embarrassing for the other colleagues. I mean, I read recently that a journalist was fired at the Washington Post for writing a tweet against a colleague who did, and that was an interesting discussion that went on. In Italy, people don't get fired because of taking sides, but definitely there's a problem of reputation for the news organization and for the journalist himself or herself if they take sides in such a way without being transparent with the public, saying this is my personal private opinion. I'm not representing my newspaper for this, and there should be some rules to help the public understand what's happening on social media. There's a lot of confusion, and I think journalists are not helping the conversation on social media if they don't know how to use them right. That's my personal opinion, to tell you the truth. But let me go on with questions here because time is running short. There's another question for both of you, that we've been talking about new media like social media that allow everybody to express themselves and share their own truths. How do you think it's possible to reconcile such freedom of expression with the risk of disinformation?
Again, another great question, and I think this is probably one of the biggest questions of our age. And I think in the end, what happens is, what I hope will happen, is that we appreciate the right balance. And in reality, if you believe in freedom of expression, then you know that will include things that you do not agree with and things that may not sit comfortably with you. But that is a bit of the price that you pay, because the other way to it is worse. And I think that one of the things that I think news organizations can do in this space is, like, if everybody is giving an opinion on something, I actually believe this is an opportunity for news organizations, because there's a cacophony of noise. There's almost too much information. And this is where brands that are clear, understand their remit, are transparent, as you say, I think that's where they can thrive. And again, during the COVID times, you've seen that. There's been this kind of a move back to more established brands to understand that, who've been able to do, as Jeff was saying, the kind of service journalism. And I think, kind of tying it back to the impartiality versus activism point, I like the line that someone said about, again, this ex-BBC colleague, Ross Atkins. Well, I'm ex-BBC, he's still at the BBC. And he talked about, someone described it as assertive impartiality. And what he did, the way that he described it was, he said, I don't assume that anyone is going to believe what I say, or even say, or even, look at what I say. So I'm trying to make my point. I'm trying to make the points. But what I'm doing is I'm doing it by showing the evidence, right? Yeah. And I think that's the thing that is, these explainers are brilliant. I highly recommend, go and Google Ross Atkins if you haven't seen him. ROS, first name Atkins, Atkins, BBC. You'll see some of his explainers. But all he does is he just states the facts of a situation. And he goes, the audiences are smart. They can come to their own conclusions. They don't need an opinion on this. But you have to show the evidence, right? And I think that's the element when you're talking about freedom of expression, disinformation, misinformation. I think it's about showing the evidence, being transparent, and being clear about that.
Jeff.
2
quick points, and we'll get to more questions if we have time. One is, I think that the journalists have to show that we are human, that we're not an institutional voice. And so I think social media is a good thing. I mean, the rule should be simple. Don't be a jerk. Don't be an idiot. Don't cause fights you don't need to, right? Same rules you'd have on the playground, but we hope we've learned by now. But as to the point about disinformation and how do we tell the difference and how do we deal with this huge scale of speech, I really welcome all of this speech, because the people who were too long not included in mass media now finally can be heard. And thus we have Black Lives Matter, and we have Me Too, and we have Occupy Wall Street, and we have movements around the world that can gather because there is so much speech. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Now, in that, of course, there are idiots and fools and liars and frauds. And what do we do about that? Well, I'm reminded of an Italian, Niccolo Perotti, who in 1470 made what is said to be the first call for censorship of the press. And he wrote to the Pope because he'd read a horrible translation, in his view, of Pliny, and said to the Pope, you must do something about this. We cannot allow this stuff to come off the presses. You must appoint censors. And I realized as I thought about it that he wasn't asking for censors at all. What he was asking for was the creation of the institutions of the editor and the publisher to assure quality coming off the press. And those institutions didn't exist in 1470, but as time went on, society invented them so we could deal with questions of quality and authority in this world of a new abundance of speech. Well, today we find ourselves in a situation where those institutions can't deal with the scale of speech today. So we're going to have to reinvent or invent new institutions to deal with that. And rather than concentrating constantly on getting rid of disinformation and bad speech, I think we've got to turn our attention to supporting good speech. That includes journalism, it includes the arts, it includes listening to communities. And I think that if we turn our efforts and our resources to doing that, we're going to get farther along, just as in the day, Perotti couldn't get rid of that bad translation, but there was plenty of good stuff to come off the press.
I love the story from 1470 Italy. I mean, you guys, Jeff Jarvis is studying Italian ancient history here to talk about disinformation and to talk about media. There's another question here about communities from a local perspective. So let me translate. How can this need for local news be also global? I mean, with a view on the world. How can a story that is very contextualized in a local environment have the same value for an individual that doesn't know or doesn't share those values from that community? Wow.
I was going to say, I think the example that you made about the wage equity situation is sort of a good example of that, because you are having underpaid, potentially exploited workers there in a locale, but it's part of a much broader issue, right?
Yeah.
And it's and showing how the pieces fit together. I think the way that you described it was fascinating, and I think for me, the way that you said, well, in terms of a solution, if actually you look at this and you're realizing actually what started as you farm owners exploiting these farm workers, and then when you dig into it and listen to the farm owners, you're like, actually, you're getting a tax structure that's creating perverse incentives that's actually hurting people. And if we can highlight that, I think that's actually journalism at its best. Finding something that needs to be investigated and understood properly, not just, oh, look, bad guy, good guy, right? Or bad girl, good girl, right? And then saying, right, this is the broader picture, and then this is the solution, I think is the way to hopefully connect with that person that might not care that somebody's being underpaid on a farm in Brescia.
Thank you.
I'll be a heretic for a moment, just for the sake of entertaining MADHAV. People are saying that local matters more and more and more. I'm not sure that's true. Here where I live in New Jersey, I have Trump people next to me. I can't stand them. I don't want to talk to them. I don't like them very much, and they don't like me. But online, I find all kinds of communities that I care about greatly. And I started a COVID Twitter list in COVID where I followed scientists and doctors around the world who understood COVID, which was highly local, but global. I have a book coming out at the end of the year called The Gutenberg Parenthesis. That's why I know the story about Perotti. And so I'm looking at things like magazines, and magazines became something that brought together communities of interest across boundaries, not just locally. So what I'm saying is that I think that people feel a sense of local, not only around geography now, but also around their interests and needs and circumstances and affinities. And so in that sense, everything is local. That rather than finding just that local angle to the big story of the pandemic, clearly it's being lived locally, and also the policy matters globally. The environment, the same way. Employment, as MADHAV and you have said, the same way. And so I think we could also look at people as members of their communities. That trans journalist who grew up in a small town America and felt very lonely on the internet could find that he wasn't alone, and that he had connections with people elsewhere. And so he had a different definition of local from what I have. And that's okay. That's what we have to do, is get past the mass media mindset that everyone is the same and can be treated the same, and to respect people as individuals and members of communities, and to serve them as such. And even a newspaper can start to do that by listening to communities and understanding their needs. And so it's not just having a random sample of people. One day go out and talk to people who have cancer and find out what their needs are. Talk to elderly people, find out what their needs are. Talk to parents and find out what their needs are. And they share needs, but they also have distinct needs.
Yeah, it's about communities of interest. I could build on that, but I don't know if there's another question, because I know we're close on time.
No, so far I haven't received other questions from Giorgio.
So I'll just, if I can just build
yes,
on that, in terms
do.
of communities of interest, I think that's right from a local level. I think that also works on a national level. One of my favorite stories was from a Swedish news organization that were looking at the traffic patterns across the 24-hour cycle. And they realized they were getting bizarre upticks at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And they were trying to figure out why. And so they did some audience research, again, talking to your audience. And it turns out that if you're having trouble sleeping, it is not uncommon for you to go on the internet and start to read something on the internet. And what they realized is they had an entire community of insomniacs. And insomniacs have a certain series of needs. They actually created a paid-for service around insomnia, because if anybody who has serious insomnia, you know that it's a very debilitating thing, and you actually have needs. And so it sounds crazy, but they created a revenue stream by accidentally when one person was just going, why does the graph go up here at 2 o'clock in the morning? And so you can accidentally find communities of interest within your broader community. And I think you can serve them. And then, hopefully they can deliver value to you as well.
A newspaper in Austria decided to buy a bakery so you could get with your newspaper every morning a pastry, which I think is something that I'm sure would work well in Italy as well. There's a lot of opportunities out there that also include money.
Yeah, that's a huge new chapter, and we don't have time for that. Can I ask you just one thing that it's a personal interest of mine. How do you do audience research in the internet era without spending a lot of money by doing it online, crowdsourcing on social media and other things like that? I mean, what would you suggest I should do, for example, to crowdsource, to get the audience to answer my question on how can we service you better?
Well, I honestly, I think you can do very simple free things immediately online. Google Forms, Google Surveys, other non-Google things as well. But there are a lot of ways to ask people those questions. But I would also challenge you and say, I think you should do things in real life, COVID allowing, laws allowing, right, where you are. But I do think creating community events in your community where people can see you. And then I think that's the other thing that I've been seeing locally, is that it humanizes those people, right? You talk about a non-byline, right? When you read it, you read a name. But if you then go and see the person who saw it,
right,
that gives you an even, that's an even bigger connection, right? So I would actually say, I think you should create a series of in real life events, and maybe you start by doing something online and say, would you be interested in this? And you could do that, or you could just have pop-up events as well, right? Go to where the people are. I mean, this is Italy. I absolutely adore Italy, and I do know that Italians love to talk and love to have discussions on it. So I don't think it would be that hard.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
No.
in the audience, who would like to go? If you said, we're just going to buy you a free cup of coffee, come and have a free cup of coffee and talk to us, right? Who would go, right? Maybe some of us would go, right? So start that way is what I would suggest.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody was able to follow us, and I hope the translation came through for people who couldn't listen to us directly. And how are we doing with time, Giorgio? What are you talking? What are you saying? Are you there? Are you listening to us?
Oh, he's just coming he was in the audience.
Okay, or he was.
Good to see him moving.
He was looking.
Well, while he's coming in, I just want to say thank you to the translators for taking my whatever my crazy words were and make it into beautiful Italian.
And my too fast talking New Yorker sentences.
Grazie mille.
So, grazie a voi. Okay,
Allora, so
the time is over.
I know.
I'm sorry for this, but we have another panel is ready to start. But I have to thank you.
Thank you.
The audience
Next year in Sicily.
Prossimo anno
Okay.
in Sicilia.
Thank you, everybody. Grazie.
Thank you very much. And as we said next year in person in Sicily. Grazie mille.
Ciao.
Grazie.
Ciao. Bye bye.
Facciamo una pausa brevissima perché purtroppo il prossimo panel cominciamo 20.